Hey folks, if you're looking for in-depth indie reviews, you're in the right place, and today I'm going to be talking shop about the review copy I received of Inti Creates' recently released action platformer, Gal Guardians Demon Purge. Formerly Grim Guardians, but that's a story for a different day. Instead, it's time to figure out whether this experience eclipsed all my expectations built from my last foray into their folio, or if I wound up ghosting these gals. I'm your host Arlian. Let's find out together. Classes have been cancelled for the Kamizono siblings after an excessive prank by an immature demon leads to their school and all its students being merged with a demonic dimension. Thankfully, they're more than up to the task, given that Maya and Shinobu happen to be talented demon hunters, which may explain the depths of the grudge held by that demon. Overall, it's not an overly complex premise, but functionally, I still enjoyed it a fair bit. Whether it's the scenes sprinkled at the start and end of every stage, or just to introduce boss battles, or the few that exist besides, they all lend the game a certain fun, campy charm. What's more, while there are some self-aware moments which poke fun at the medium and genre, it wasn't a style that dominated the overall experience. That said, I will admit that there were some nods that I wasn't quite as familiar with, since the game does essentially take place in the same universe as the Gal Gun games, which probably explains the slightly more risque comedic beats that crop up when you get into the game's second lap. Because, well, yeah, there's a fair amount of story that crops up once you've beaten it once, which helps to clarify the situation and paves the way towards the game's actual endings. Plural. Of the three that exist, one of them simply requires getting through the game again, but the other two are a bit more finicky. Mostly they boil down to a pair of collectathons, with the one requiring a trio of mechanical parts from certain stages, and the other requiring you to rescue every single character from across the game, which, is a bit of an endeavor. Though I suppose I ought to get gabbing about mechanics if I really want to explain why. So, let's get to it. First off, Gal Guardians is a stage-based action platformer. If you're familiar with more retro-flavored Castlevanias, it'll feel familiar enough to you. Up to limited lives and being knocked back by aggressive enemies into bottomless pits. Admittedly, that isn't actually that bad, since the game is fairly forgiving with checkpoints scattered throughout the levels. Lives can be farmed up by collecting points or finding them, and it requires you to have both of your characters give up the ghost before they can revive the other. But it's not easy. I mean, you can make it easier with difficulty settings, but you could also make it a more purist flavored experience too if you so choose. If anything, I'd say this game feels very much in line with another Inti Create title, namely Curse of the Moon, up to and including the ability to swap between multiple characters who have their own unique skill sets. And I'll give them credit here, the two play like night and day. Maya Kamizono provides a more high-risk, high-reward playstyle, since she's a melee combatant but a fair bit more fragile than her sister. That said, she can mulch enemies in no time flat. Shinobu, on the other hand, brings an Uzi to a demon fight, providing her a solid keep-away game only marginally hampered by the occasional need to reload. She also has a lot more health than her sibling, providing an overall more forgiving experience. But that's only the tip of the iceberg insofar as their kit. Each one has their own personal arsenal of sub-equips, which gradually broadens for each character whenever you clear the boss of a stage. These range from offensive options like a big honking scythe or a homing missile launcher, to more exploration-related abilities like a grappling hook or origami platforms. But they all provide more interesting options for tackling the various stages moving forward, as well as broadening the paths available to you when backtracking. What's more, once you reach the victory lap that characterizes the game's second half, you'll also be granted the ability to upgrade your items by beating bosses, allowing you to make certain portions of your kit more accessible, or all of it if you're inclined to backtrack and refight certain bosses. And I have to admit, backtracking is actually a major part of the game. While not quite as important during your initial playthrough, there is a wide array of secrets hidden in each stage, with permanent power-ups like increased sub-weapon capacity, more health, and even a power-up that reduces all of the damage you take. And given that the stage routes change and the bosses actually get fiercer during your victory lap rematches, every advantage that you can get helps a great deal. What's more, I absolutely thrived off the sheer variety of pathways that opened up to me during the second run-through. as the game offers a lot more options for how to traverse through its stages with the various sub-equips like I mentioned, alongside brand new paths specific to that playthrough. It felt genuinely rewarding to discover new trails to roam down, clever ways to use a power with an earlier obstacle, like floating across water or freezing it. That, and teaching me the joys of abusing Shinobu's grappling hook as much as humanly possible. Seriously, your mobility options are absurd once you gain access to it. That said, there is a rather key issue with exploration that I've been glossing over. Specifically, this game is a collectathon if you want to gain more than the basic ending. While it is fun and has a memorable final boss, each of the other two endings have their own notable final bosses, which are locked behind finding key items scattered throughout the game's stages. Here's the thing though, you don't have an in-game map beyond what shows up on the stage select, and that map doesn't do much for telling you if you found all the collectibles in a given stage. Your only option is to scour each area as thoroughly as possible, which is a bit tricky given how vast levels can feel, especially once you have the full breadth of your mobility tools. The true ending isn't too bad, as it required 3 items from 3 stages which weren't too far off the beaten path, and the finale does feel like a treat once you've done the normal ending, even if it is an easier experience. That said, the very hidden alternate ending requires that you rescue every missing student and teacher in the game. It's an undertaking and a half, and the final boss sequence you earn for doing so led to my girlfriend's thumb giving out from mashing the fire button. Like, yes, there's a radar system that alerts you to things when you're very proximal to things, but given the map size, this doesn't help as much as you think, which is a major reason I could not be damned to interact much with the find all the collectible panties scattered throughout the game for an achievement quest. Just miss me with that. Frankly, I had more fun with the boss rush post-game content, since, well, the boss encounters in this game are a load of fun. Each of them have some decently varied movesets you'll need to master, and the harder variants to encounter once you reach them in the victory lap. And it's just an absolute treat to flex on them all back to back, showcasing that you've really mastered the game. Especially given that they've taken a page from the Curse of the Moon Book of Boss Tactics. That's right, all the bosses have final attacks they can unload on you in a last-ditch effort to drop you, which isn't too bad in single player, but can definitely whittle you down during the arena runs. Unless you can see it coming, in which case, it sets you up for some really spicy finishers. It's good stuff, honestly. And if you're a combat junkie, there's a whole nother layer to the arena with a challenge mode, which pits you against a randomized pool of bosses with drastically reduced stats and forces you to pick between a narrow pool of upgrades as you progress forward. It's genuinely neat, and honestly, likely a better application of the game's co-op mode because, well, I actually managed to get a player 2 for my run through of the game during my victory lap, and while I certainly appreciate that provided a noticeable increase in my ability to shred enemies when we coordinated, and some fairly creative ways to confront platforming puzzles, such as using each other as platformings including while floating with the parasol, it also had some weird issues. Such as, if your player 2 fell down a pit, they weren't able to be revived, forcing you to commit seppuku, or weird instances where the second player wasn't able to follow after you if you got too far from them, which was especially bad given Shinobu has some pretty crazy mobility options. It could be legitimately frustrating at times, and it would have been nice to have a means of snapping your partner over to you if enough time and distance had passed, making this a fun but still somewhat flawed system, and leaving me grateful that I tackled the crux of the content alone. Speaking of content though, I really did have a blast soaking in the world of Gal Guardians. The overall art for the cutscenes, the sprite work of the characters, the visuals of the enemies, the gorgeous stages, it's all just fantastic to look at, and in the sound department, I overall appreciated the voice acting. Whether it was the fun voice clips during combat or during the cutscenes, it was overall solid, and the music was a lot of fun to boot. But was it enough to elevate this experience? Well, as a whole, I really do like Gal Guardians. As an action platformer, it was a fun experience, and the overall growth in the player's ability to confront enemies and explore the world made even the obligatory second lap a lot more enjoyable than I would have otherwise expected it to be. That said, there were some sticking points to me, and it was mostly the sheer amount of time it expected you to pore over its stages without any real semblance of guidance to help mark your path. I don't mind scouring the world of Metroidvanias, but they very frequently provide me tools to keep track of everywhere I've been and the things I've found, and connect together in a somewhat more organic way. Between the flawed collectathon elements that led to extremely lengthy and iterative leaps through levels, alongside the somewhat off-feeling cooperative gameplay, I left feeling that Gal Guardians was often fun and overall competent, but still left a bit to desire. Overall, I can safely call it a hit, and I definitely didn't regret going through and getting both the normal and true ending. But the journey past that was a bit more of a mixed bag, because the future playthroughs into stages didn't really provide that much insofar as incentivizing the repeated visits it required. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell. For Discord savvy folks, there's a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, in the video description, alongside a link to my merch house if you'd like to get some Crit Hit themed swag like a shirt or a mousepad or a coffee mug, and to my Patreon if you're curious to see the reviews before they hit YouTube or just to support me and the other members of Crit Hit. Also to my Twitch if you want to see me get dunked on in indie games live. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.